Father Gregory Pine, such a joy to have you back on, what's my show called? It's not Pines for the Aquinas, it's called Encaffeinated.
Nailed it.
Nailing it. This is a great interview already. It's great. It is St. Patrick's Day, and do you happen to be drinking a beverage right now?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
As they say en français, I'm making a Lent of alcohol. So I occasionally splurge on Sundays because my mom had a cool way of counting Lent. She's like, check it out, 40 days, right? So count them up, include the Triduum, comes to 46. You know what happens when you subtract the Sundays? 40. Blamo. So yeah, the Pine family household was never a fast on Sunday household, ever. So I cut loose. St. Patrick will be transferred to the Sunday.
I was going to say, that is very self-controlled of you to not do Thursday and Sunday and the 19th, because that's St. Joseph's feast day,
right?
Which is this Saturday. So
yeah,
I mean, I admire your self-control.
Thank you.
And the 25th. Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
And the 28th is my grandma's birthday. So
I got to celebrate that. Celebrate that. I think I turned to the manuscript for this book on March 29th of last year. So got to celebrate that too.
You must celebrate that too.
Yeah.
And there's a lot you could think of. You know what? Everybody has a feast day. Multiple people
Everyone's
have
got a feast day
every day. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's cause for celebration. Oh my goodness. Well, happy St. Patrick's Day. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And last time, I really, really enjoyed our conversation. And since then you have written a book, which is called, let me see if I get this title right. It is called Prudence. Choose confidently, live boldly.
Nailed it.
Yes. That is such a great title. And I love the confidence and the boldness that made their way into the title, because we don't usually associate those with prudence. So we're just going to dive deep. So I asked you this last time, and it probably hasn't changed much, but what calls have you received from God in your life so far? And what has receiving those calls looked and felt like? If you want to give, people can go, I'll link to your previous interview, but if you want to give any new calls, like maybe writing this book or anything else that's been going on in the last year and a half.
Yeah. Writing this book was a call. It's a big thing. Another thing is I think I'm called to be more recollected, just because life is busy and it's hyper connected, but it's not necessarily recollected. So I've been bopping the chapel with more frequency. Awesome. And which has been good. And then I am also called not to look at my cell phone as much, because it's become a kind of constant converse, which has become, I'm just going to start stringing weird words together now, a constant converse that is a simulacrum of the recollection which I seek to cultivate. So it's like, I think the recollection that we ought to have is oftentimes just shifted over to the cell phone, because it's like, I am sad, cell phone. I am distracted, cell phone. I am tired, cell phone. But in all those moments, it's to God whom we ought to turn. Yeah. And so, I've been called to be more recollected, set the cell phone aside, and other things, but we'll leave it at that.
Sure. A couple questions about that, because I think you as a Dominican are called to be perhaps more in the world. You're a preacher, order of preachers, so your call is to be out there speaking. How does that, obviously they don't ban you from your cell phone, social media, whatever. So how do they govern that now? Because this is a brand new thing in the last, 15 years or whatever. How do they negotiate that with religious life?
I think religious life is just figuring it out, to be honest. You have some religious communities which ban it, which I think is probably a prudent response in light of the circumstances, since it is such like a kind of information and availability explosion. It's like, do you want that in your cloister? Because it makes of your cloister not a cloister, if we're honest.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I think it's a mistake to kind of uncritically introduce technology into a religious community. I think that's probably true across the board, regardless of whether you're religious or not religious. I just think that the human person should be somewhat suspicious of new technology, which introduces a world or wealth of goods into life. So,
absolutely.
In my case,
leave it? Yeah. Do they leave it up to your personal discernment, kind of, as to how much you're going to use it? Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
While we're in initial formation, we don't have a cell phone, and then it's like once you're ordained a priest and it becomes somewhat necessary for pastoral care, although I'm always suspicious when people say it's necessary, because it's like, could you get by without it? I think so. Hard to say, but probably. I think that when we find ourselves saying like, I need it, I depend upon it, I thus and such it, it's like, I don't know. I mean, that's what they want you to think, the companies that have you update every 3 years, but I don't know I digress.
No, this is all really good. I know it's a huge struggle for so many people. And I've often wondered that, because I do see priests and religious on social media. It's like, we don't want to completely disappear from that sphere, because that's where people's time and attention are going, but we are complicit in giving our time and attention to it in order to be there. And so as a personal discernment, when does that become too much? And then there's also the question of just like being able to network with people. I've met so many amazing Catholics on social media. People have found out about my conferences through social media. But I felt called to step back a lot from it as well. And you know what? I'm so like happy living my real life that it really doesn't, I don't miss it. Like I've stepped back for like 4 months at a time, multiple times in the last year and a half, and for different reasons. And just like, it gets to the point where I'm like, I could post something. I think I'm just going to go hang out with my kids or my friends or whatever. And it's so good. Yeah. Cool. But cool that it's a personal discernment. Yeah. And I'm sure it's an ongoing struggle, and it's a good struggle. It's, cool. So that actually takes us really nicely into my first question. I'm going to read a quote from your book, and there were so many good ones. I wish I had a physical copy to hold up and tell everyone, buy this book, but until there is, everyone should just buy it. It's so beautifully written. But here's one that I really liked. You said, many of us, I suspect, take on so much because we feel like we need it in order to justify our existence. With the wordless intuition that my life might be a bit light on meaning, I find it easier to engage in feverish activity rather than to sound the depths of my solitude. So I come to fill my days with busyness because I am afraid. By fragmenting my life, parceling it out among myriad tasks, I barely keep at bay the creeping suspicion that maybe none of this matters. And I think that speaks to me, that speaks to so many people, whether we're busying ourselves with just going from thing to thing to thing. So how does this kind of busyness, and our discontent, where are they supposed to lead us? And how do we go about kind of getting past that initial fragmented activity? Yeah.
I think I'm in a very practical mood right now, which rarely happens in the life of a Dominican friar. So I'm just going to go with it. But so like the thing that I am doing right now for most of the hours of most of my days is writing a dissertation. And I have to answer this question in very concrete ways on a daily basis. So I have to ask myself what matters. Because if I don't ask myself that question, then my dissertation will be 4,000 pages long. Because if I don't judge it according to some standard, then why not just include everything that I've read and researched? Because it testifies to the fact that I read these books, right? And that might be impressive to some person. So I may as well flaunt the fact. But it's like, no, Gregory, the point for which you are writing this thing is to grow in wisdom. I mean, to get a credential, but to grow in wisdom. And it pertains to the wise man to order. So in each case, I have to judge what it is that I'm currently working on against the backdrop of the overall project, which is like, how do the mysteries of the life of Christ save? And if the thing that I'm working on actually contributes to clarifying that question, then I can be like, all right, let's lean into this. Let's determine the extent to which this matters. And I think that, let's zoom back out. This is true of our lives, right? Our lives aren't just containers in which to toss many tasks, because to what end? All right. If we're filled up, all right, kind of by happenstance, you have a fulfilled life in some, I don't know, very, very thin sense of fulfilled. But fulfillment is not just about the content. It's about the form of that content and the way in which that content goes towards like making something genuinely beautiful and whole and resplendent. So to do that, the parts need to be ordered. The parts need to have some coherence. They need to be able to, be in conversation, or at the very least, they need to contribute to something beyond themselves. So yeah, I think that when it comes to evaluating tasks in like what else would I say? When people invite me, I was invited to do something, not this weekend, but next weekend. And for me, whenever it's like something ministerial, the usual go-to word is yes, because I'm a priest and I was ordained to be generous, right? So if I'm not given to the people of God, then what am I doing with my life?
Right.
But also, like, I've been having difficulty sleeping recently. And sometimes, like, while I'm writing my dissertation, my most frequently recurring thought is, I can't wait till this day is over. Which is not like an especially comforting thing, right? So
No.
I need to be able to judge, do I go to this like retreat weekend in Luoz, which is in Canton Graubünden, which is a 5-hour public transit ride from here, which involves 5 transfers, all of which can be missed, and which costs X number of dollars. And these people don't have a budget for it. So they're asking me, it's just like, I judge it against this backdrop. And when you do, you have to ask yourself, like, who am I? What is my life for? And how do I give it?
Yes, absolutely. It makes me think of when I was single as well, when I would feel this obligation to like go to every birthday party that I was invited to. I filled up my evenings so much, and I just never questioned it for the longest time. And now I I think it's just age. But I look at it now and I'm like, why did I do all that stuff? And then same thing, even in motherhood, like there's an endless task, an endless list of things that you could do as a mom. And so you're like, oh, well, I have to be the mom who makes her own granola and raises chickens. No, you don't. What's actually more important? Is it more important? Are you actually called to like sit and read a book to your child and like look in their eyes and listen to them? Or are you called to be like, go talk to your dad. I'm going to be here making your homemade granola, and you can just so easily go into down these rabbit holes in whatever context. So I love that answer. And I feel like it's applicable to just everybody discerning any decision in their life. And kind of branching off from that, there's another quote of yours about getting at your how. And this is from Viktor Frankl, who was in the Auschwitz concentration camp. And he discovered that the people who survived were the ones who had a how. I think there's a quote I had here: the human person is made for meaning, and he who knows the why for his existence will be able to bear almost any how. So how do you get about finding your why? Sorry, I phrased that incorrectly, but
no.
How do you find your why? And particularly if you haven't, like for me, it's kind of built in a sense, like my children, my husband, but someday they're going to be grown up, my children, and my husband's already grown up.
He's working on it.
Well, yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah. And my children are going to be grown up and they're not going to need me in the same way. So for anyone who doesn't have that built-in kind of why, how would you go about finding that? Super general advice, but I think you'll do a great job with it.
Well, remains to be seen. I think that part of the answer to the question comes from the recognition that the why is already inbuilt, right? So when we say that the human being is made to the image of God, St. Thomas Aquinas doesn't often say that we're made in the image of God. He often says that we're made to the image of God, ad imaginem Dei. So there's a kind of dynamism already present within our very identity, because ad imaginem Dei signifies that we stand to grow in the image of God. And so, all right, is that especially specific or determinate? No, but it becomes specific and it becomes determinate in the living of your life. So by virtue of the fact that you are the daughter of these two parents, that you were born in this year, in this place, that you were born in these circumstances, were raised in this way, attended these schools, found, like these internships, eventually got these jobs, fell in with these friends who encouraged you to go to these retreats, you become the person who you are now. All right. And there's a kind of freedom that you exercise, but part of that freedom is, like making bold and beautiful choices. And part of that freedom is ratifying the choices that go before you. So like you can't make your parents to be other than they are. And it's just the fact of the matter that your parents are going to program you with both their strengths and their weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So for you, that's the hand that you're dealt, right?
Yep.
The question is then, how do I play this hand well, or how do I play this hand beautifully? And I think that, talked about this last time. For me, like a big thing is desire, that God creates you with desires to give indication of the things for which you're made. And that over the course of your life, those desires are healed and they're elevated. So it's not as if, the Christian drama is to repress all your desires and then enter slowly into a sensory deprivation chamber. So that way you can be wholly the Lord's in a vat of goo. No, the point is for your desires to become more expressed, like more, what would you say, like bold, more engaged, as it were. And so I think, like, as you live your life, make good use of the sacraments, pray, engage in Christian friendship, introduce little pens here and there, study the faith, serve the material poor, etc. Your desires are healed by grace and they are elevated by grace such that they become more known to you and kind of more known to the world. So yeah, when it comes to discerning the why in life, I think it's just like your why in life is God, and then God makes that specific as you go. You don't have to have it figured out by now. You figure it out kind of on the way, because our life is a life on the way. And so for me, the why of my life, the way in which it resonates like in my body is as a fit. I can tell you for a fact that I've been writing the present chapter of my dissertation for about the past 3.5 weeks. I mean, like, I've been researching it for the past 1,000 years, but I've been writing it for the past 3.5 weeks. And most of the last 3 weeks have felt like, suffering unto death. But like, I don't resent that, right? I don't hold that against anyone. I certainly don't hold that against God. I don't hold it against myself or my province or whomever. It doesn't matter to me. It's just like, I know that this suffering is the suffering to which I am called. It's very simple, it's very humble, but it's mine. And I know it to be mine on account of the fact that I feel myself to fit here. And that if I had 1,000 lives to live, I would live every single one of them as a Dominican friar, because this is the best way for me to die. And that's it. It's like a simple process, 4 steps: study, 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 die. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Always going back to the deeper meanings behind things. And yeah, the purpose for which I'm here. And I love that. I just want to highlight what you said about being made to the image, like to grow in his image. So you already are in his image, but you then mature in it, essentially. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. That's super cool. I love that.
Welcome to my channel. Welcome back to my subscribers. Thank you so much if you are a subscriber, and if you're not, please do be sure to hit that button and also the bell before you leave my channel. And I invite you to also please leave a like and a comment on this video. It helps the channel get seen by more eyes and also lets me know what you would like to see in the future. Before we get back to the episode, I have a question for you. Do you feel that your need for community is filled fully as much as it needs to be? Do you feel that you have intentional friendships? If not, then I have a wonderful resource that I encourage you to check out. CFM, the Christian Family Movement, is providing a network to Christian families to fill their need for community. CFM is a growing worldwide movement, and the pillars are reflection, action, and conversation, and they're geared towards helping families grow together in virtue and intentional friendship. This is from John and Phoebe in South Carolina. They shared that CFM is more than monthly get-togethers. It's unique in that people come together as strangers and grow together as families of all sizes, sharing thoughts on worldviews, strengthening commitments to each other, the church, and supporting each other in good times and bad. We are blessed to be a part of it. So I believe it's 1,000% essential to be a part of a very strong community. And membership dues are something like $10 to join, so it's a no-brainer. So go to cfm.org to check it out.
One of my things when I started this podcast was I had this theory, and it has been proven to be correct by your book definitively now. But I had this theory, and I really wanted people to know that God wants them to be happy. And that is something that I see over and over again, is like, some part of us suspects that God really doesn't want us to be truly happy. And we don't even want to use that word, because has too much of an association with my pleasure, me enjoying myself, versus that deep, kind of much more lasting happiness. And I love that you just kind of took the bull by the horns and you're like, no, this is how it is. So I'm going to read this quote. God wants you to be happy. He created you for this express purpose. He trains the whole of his attention on securing it. He's not looking to trip you up with temptation and trial. He's not waiting at a distance for you to fail. He's working patiently and ceaselessly to draw you to himself, who is happiness itself. Yes, to draw you to himself, who is happiness itself. Your very existence is testimony that God's happiness cannot be contained within the bounds of his nature. His happiness brims over and fills creation that it might return to him in praise. In effect, God has a secret too good to keep, the secret of his divine happiness, and he shares that secret with you that you might know it and now and for eternity. Sorry, my notes are far enough away. Yeah. So what would you, okay. So obviously that's a very long quote. What do you want to say to Catholics who don't think that God wants them to be happy? Do you want to expound on that?
I mean, for those who don't think that God wants them to be happy or don't believe that or don't hope that, as it were, don't experience that in the marrow of their bones, I think there's probably reasons for which you don't believe that or hope that or experience that in the marrow of your bones, because you've suffered some trauma in life. And that like, to say that God wants you to be happy doesn't make it so that you have to say, I haven't experienced trauma in my life.
Yeah.
So the two, can be consistent, because the scope of the happiness which God seeks to give is the whole of your life and eternity beyond. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, like, once we've suffered disappointment or once we suffered trauma, we begin to despair of God's generosity or despair of God's goodness. But it's a goodness or it's a generosity that's proven in the end, or it's proven unto the end. And I think that, if we kind of compromise on our expectation of it, or like manage our expectations, or we become kind of business managerial about the whole experience, like, I would get my hopes up, but there's chances that I'd be disappointed. And as a result of which, because I want to like decrease the amplitude of my mood swings, I will now attenuate it as if I were taking an SSRI, but just applying it to the whole of my life. Which is like, I get it, like I understand that the swings hurt. And I understand that they expose you to wounds, right? They make you vulnerable. But I think that there's part of the Christian existence is to be open to the prospect that we will be wounded until such time as Christ returns in glory, which is terrible. And I'm not saying that God wounds, except insofar as God made creation such that we are liable to be wounded. So God doesn't wound, but God uses that occasion as a way by which to heal us and to grow us, as a way by which to draw us closer to him in relationship. And so, like, St. John of the Cross will say things like, God wounds so that he may heal. And so I'm thinking also of this quote from Origen, where he describes how God is like a physician who does not heal the wound superficially, because he knows that were he to do so, it would fester beneath the surface of the skin and prove yet more pestiferous. He says, rather, God gets in at the outset and heals it from the inside out, which will often mean, like Origen's, 3rd century wild Alexandrian prose, it means like cutting. It's like, right? And it will feel terrible. It will be experienced as trauma of a sort. But I think that, we just pray each day for a greater openness, for a greater abandonment, as it were. There's this beautiful prayer of a Jesuit of the last century, de la Grande Maison, who says something to the effect of like, give me a heart that is like a wound that will not heal until heaven. Yeah. So
that's deep. Wow. Yeah. That, as you're talking, that gives words to a lot of things that I've thought that have not really been able to articulate. I think I shared in our email exchange that last year was about the most difficult year of my life, with my daughter being in the hospital for 4 months and almost dying multiple times. And it was a horrible ordeal, and just so many, it really made me touch on those questions that I have believed for a long time. Does God really want me to be happy? And I think I believe it now more than ever, but I can't always say why exactly. And I think there were a lot of moments where it felt like this is the end. When my daughter was, had another medical event and might have died, or, just another surgery, the suffering was just so prolonged. And it's not, I think, to put it in very, very, very simple terms, it's just not the end. That suffering is not the end of what God wants for you. And I think the fruits of having gone through that, and then to come back home and because I wasn't even living at my house for 4 months. We had to go follow her to the hospital. So I only came back to my house about 5 times in those 4 months for a day. And then when we finally returned home and we got to see our friends again after so long, after so many terrible things happened, and I think I just appreciate them so much more. And again, this is still not the end, right? This is just like, if you take life and you kind of just take it down to like 5 months, but the joy of the happiness of knowing like what our life is in a way that I never had before. Like the fact that like when you see your child go through so many medical dysfunctional things, you appreciate the fact that that anything ever heals, or that anything worked at all to begin with, in a way that we never had before. I'm not sure I'm explaining this well, but basically just you appreciate what works and what is in a new way. And it's like this very kind of deep happiness that I can't quite explain, but like I just kind of floated through life assuming that I was always going to be healthy and my family would always be healthy. And then when you have those things taken away, you appreciate them when they're returned to you, if that makes sense. Just, to your point about like trauma and healing that. And like God, I think did a lot of work is continuing to do a lot of work in me that is not, it's not surface level. It's that cutting like you're describing. So I hope that was really good. And I hope it helps anyone who is going through that, maybe identifying that they don't really think that God wants them to be happy. I think like the first step is like hang in there and keep praying and let God show you like that receptivity. That's very beautiful. Moving on to so we've been talking a lot about the first chapter, because each chapter in your book is a question. So the first one is, am I happy? And then the second one is, am I able? And you begin with a very true admission that no, we are not able. Holiness, trying to achieve holiness immediately is going to show us our weaknesses, and we can't just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. So how can you, this is a big question, but what are kind of some of the main ways that you see Catholics getting it wrong when it comes to striving after holiness and our relationship with grace and our dependence on God?
Yeah, I think I've become very allergic to the just do it approach because I find it depressing and dispiriting. So oftentimes you'll hear witness talks given and the person gets up there and describes some sensational way in which the Lord led them from, debauchery or like deep, dark, otherwise hair-raising lives into a place of grace, into a place of, where they can testify to the fact that God's at work in their life, which is great. And then the work of kind of translating that to the ordinary Christian existence is often left undone. And the appeal that's given at the end is like, so you could do it too, just try harder. Which I just think is a bad way in which to approach the mystery of grace, because the first thing that we would profess of the spiritual life is that it's a gift. And that before the gift giver, we don't have rights, we don't have a claim. And as a result of which, our trying harder, if it sets off on the wrong foot, can actually be our undoing, right? If we, I could see how the devil would be very invested in that type of image, because he's like, all right, get him to depend entirely upon himself, such that when he falls, he has no one else to accuse. So I think that there's a sense in which our spiritual lives begin from the posture of a beggar, right? There's Luigi Giussani, who founded the ecclesial movement Communion and Liberation, said that the real protagonist of history is the beggar, as man who begs for the heart of Christ, but it's first Christ who begs for the heart of man. And so I think that we recognize the fact that our begging for God is underwritten by, in a certain sense, God's begging for us. That's anthropomorphizing, but you get it in the sense that like the only way in which we can respond in desire, the way in which we can respond with effort, is because God has gone before us. God has seen to it that that grace is supplied and that grace is continually furnished. So I think that a lot of times it's like, when you have a conversation with another human being and that other human being just keeps trying to fix you, and you're like, no, I don't want to be fixed. I mean, I'd love to be fixed, but not by you. I'm not here for advice. I just want to talk to you, like talking helps. And I think that the spiritual life is like that, talking helps in the sense that, we're living our lives. We're also interpreting our lives. And sometimes they're very obscure to us, but God makes them not plain, but God makes them such that we understand enough, lead kindly light, one step enough for me. And so I think that, part of the mystery of the grace is the recognition that we don't have the means whereby to take every step, but that by his grace, we have the means whereby to take a step.
Yeah. Yeah. You wrote also in the book about like, try to imagine your life without God. And it's like incomprehensible. You're not even at ground zero. You're nothing. You're literally nothing. And so just the grace is, it's not just a gift that we could go without. It's not like a gift that is just kind of optional. Like, okay, thank you. This is nice. It's like, no, really, your soul is literally nothing without God. And that's a really good starting point. Because I know I always thought of it as optional. I'm like, well, I'm fine. Like, I don't have the grace of each sacrament until I receive the sacrament. So I'm fine without grace, right? But no, not at all. Yeah. You wrote another thing that's pretty awesome. Virtue frees us for flourishing. So there is a great analogy used about becoming a virtuoso, like a musician. So can you just share that and like how that parallels our spiritual life?
Sure. I think a lot of people, when they think about becoming virtuous, we mentioned it earlier, this idea of like suppression or repression. You think about it as just like white knuckling your way through life. When truth be told, the goal is to become free, genuinely free. So yeah, you can use examples taken from athletics or musicianship or even craftsmanship or whatever sort, where when you refine a skill, you start with the rudiments, you kind of work your way through scales and arpeggios and etudes and stuff like that. But the point isn't so that you can, play whatever Moonlight Sonata like a robot, or that you can master a kind of what would you say, like regurgitation of things done by others. But the idea is that you will have internalized the art such that it kind of lives in you. It takes up a kind of, what would you say, like a kind of living, moving, breathing life within you. And then you are a kind of concreator, as it were. So, the musician, you put like jazz musicians in the same room and it takes them 2 seconds to get used to each other. And then they can improvise with a kind of delight and spontaneity. And the virtuous life ought to be like that. It's not like we process through a series of machine logic steps when we make every decision. It's like, okay, is this an example of number one? No. Is this an example of number two? No. Is this an example of number? No, it's like, no. No, we kind of have a feel for the human reality at stake because we have a knack for humanity. And so we're able to, engage with whatever is on, whatever's on offer, whatever's at stake in a way that's free, that's genuinely free. So I think that the promise of the life of virtue is just, it's beyond what a lot of people imagine for it, because the point is not to become a moral juggernaut who can just plow his way through every imaginable situation. The point is to become, like a moral musician, like a moral athlete, a moral craftsman of a sort. And that's, I think that's just a far more beautiful vision.
Yeah. So that whatever new situation that you've never experienced presents itself to you, you're able to live it in a way that is truly free, flourishing, because you have, like, you yourself are not bound by sin. That's so beautiful. I forgot what I was going to say, so we're going to just move right on. But let's go to Prudence, because it is the Charioteer of Virtues. What the heck does that mean?
Oh yeah.
Do it.
Auriga virtutum. What does that mean? So the basic idea is that when we talk about the moral virtue, or the four cardinal virtues, right, which maybe people have heard of, maybe they haven't, regardless, it's prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And the thing about temperance, fortitude, and justice is that they're virtues of the appetite. And we typically distinguish between rational appetite, which we sometimes call the will, and then sense appetite, which we sometimes call the emotions or the passions. So temperance and fortitude are in the sense appetite, and then justice is in the rational appetite. Now, is it that clean cut or clear cut, whatever you're supposed to say? No, I mean, there's like kind of blending, as it were. But the basic idea is that these virtues inform our desires. Okay. The question though is, okay, how do these desires, how do they inform themselves? How do these desires take in the whole landscape in order to make an informed choice or an informed decision? because there's an extent to which, or there's a degree to which you could say that like desire without thought is blind. All right. Because if we were just like a big hot mess of desires, we wouldn't be able to discern among the relative merits of those desires. If I were like a squirrel, for instance, and I went outside and I was like, tree, acorn, grass, house, bus, underneath the tire of the bus, it's like, that's bad. That ends in death. That ends in flat squirrel. So you need to be able to discern the relative merits of the things that you desire on the basis of what actually contributes to the fullness of life, what actually contributes to genuine flourishing. And basically, prudence is the virtue which does just that. So we refer to prudence as the charioteer of the virtues because it reins in these spirited appetites, the very moral energy of which conducts us along a path of flourishing, but with the recognition that they need to be steered, all right, by someone who is standing erect in the chariot itself, who has a kind of provident vision which sees the whole race course or sees the whole battlefield, such that he can direct those horses in the way that is best suited to his flourishing, the flourishing of the army, the flourishing of the republic, however you want to situate it. So in that sense, charioteer of the virtues.
Great image. And I thought of what I was going to say, and it actually was a question about the word concreator. You didn't mean co-creator, right? You said concreator.
They mean the same thing. Yeah. So
they do. Okay.
Yeah.
Shoot, I was like, is this a word? I've never heard this before, but is there a distinction?
I'm just a nerd, and I forget how to talk English sometimes because I spend most of my time with real old books. Nice. And I think that's just, so like con can mean, like with or great. And sometimes I prefer the ambiguity of con to co, because co just means with, but con, like condescend, to descend greatly, as it were. So you get what you get with co, but then you get more with con. So yeah.
I'm going to start using that. And then I can impress everyone in my life. It'd be great.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
That's the purpose of it. My morning offering every morning. Dear Jesus, bless the day. Also, may I impress the maximum number of human beings.
Oh, so good. Oh my gosh, you're awesome. So, okay. So your book is about prudence. So we're dipping into prudence quite deeply. There are 8 parts of prudence. Would you mind introducing them? Because this is just super cool.
Yeah, I think the idea behind this is that if you want to know what something is, sometimes it helps to take it apart and put it back together. Yeah. So if you're studying to be a mechanic, all right, it's good to take apart a car, put it all back together, make sure that it still works. So that way, as you address yourself to particular issues, you have a sense for where this component kind of fits within the whole. So that way you're not just kind of going about it like a bull in a china shop. So when St. Thomas lists the 8 parts of prudence, what he calls the 8 integral parts of prudence, integral just means like an integral part is a thing that when you put it together with other integral parts, it makes a whole, which has integrity. So he lists 8 integral parts of prudence, which are docility, memory, understanding, shrewdness, reasoning, foresight, caution, and circumspection. And in quick review, docility is an openness to receive counsel from other people. Memory is an openness to weigh your own experience of life and to do so well with an eye towards the future. Understanding is a kind of sensitivity to moral principles. So that way, like, you're not, well, I'll just pass on. And then reasoning, or shrewdness, I should say, is the capacity to make good snap judgments. Yeah. So like car accident, you know whether or not you should move based on whether you have a bad feeling in your spine. All right, so shrewdness. Reasoning is the capacity to see through a moral judgment, right? It's like, all right, A, then B, B, then C, therefore A, then C. All right. And then foresight is a capacity to project your decisions into the future such that you can kind of see how they'll play out on a grander scale. And then caution and circumspection, they actually deal with like the seeing through of the actual choice. You've made the choice, you're in the midst of doing the thing, but circumstances may change. So you want to be on the lookout for them. And then should circumstances change, you're able to redirect in a way that the end of whatever choice you've made is secured and that you don't get kind of lost in the details.
Awesome. I love that so much because I think it clarifies. It just clarifies when we say prudence. You're like, oh, well, that means, like making a wise decision. It's like, well, what does that really mean? And I can even see as I was reading it, my husband and I, when we make decisions together, we bring different elements to the table of, to lead up to a prudent choice. And there are certain personality types that we have been given that kind of complement each other. And it's interesting because we were actually even just talking about the potential of moving to a different house. And he brings the caution and the, well, what if this happens? And what if the inspection turns up this and all these different things? And I bring the boldness of like, but this is the big vision. This is what we've been looking for. There's land and we can have a barn where we can gather our community together. And we can, all of these, like the boldness and the prudent or in the,
we can raise chickens and made homemade granola.
I don't think I want chickens. Actually, my parents have them. They're pretty dirty, but my kids would love them. They'd probably like walk around with chickens tucked under their arms, which would be a really good photo op. So I'd consider it.
That's the second part of my morning offering. Dear Jesus, may I impress the maximum number of people and may I be presented with the maximum number of photo ops. Amen.
Opportunities for selfies. Lord.
That's it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So those breaking it down to those components can actually, I think, help me identify where am I lacking and where do I need to grow, which is super helpful. So you wrote that it's good to be thoughtful, but it's better to be bold. And this relates to our different components of prudence. What do you mean by that? And why is it better to be bold?
When St. Thomas talks about prudence, he divides it into two main steps. He says, you're thinking about the things and then you're doing the things. And he says, if we're going to try to typify prudence or sum prudence up or encapsulate prudence, it's more true of prudence that it does the things than that it thinks the things. Because there are plenty of virtues which help us to think the things well, but there's only prudence that does the things well. It is true of prudence that it is the virtue which commands. So I think that, when you're talking about these different parts, when you're talking about being bold, the challenge there is to mobilize prudence, as it were, because prudence is perfected in action. Prudence is not perfected in just thinking the things, because it's ordered or it's oriented by its very nature to the performing of those actions. Why? Because we as human beings are perfected in the performing of actions. Now, that shouldn't devolve into a just do it mentality, because the point isn't just to make a decision. The point is to engage with reality, because we are perfected by reality, because we're made open to further perfection. And the way we kind of, what would you say? The way that we assimilate that further perfection is by engaging it. So it's not to say, okay, make every decision as you see fit and just do it as quickly as possible. No. Because sometimes choosing not to act is a decision. In fact, that's a kind of action. So we're still doing this in a way that's thoughtful, in a way that's reflective, in a way that draws on all of the reasons which can be brought to bear. But we shouldn't think like, just because I've thought about it for a long time, it's therefore better, right? Often that's not the case. You can think too long about a thing and it devolves into a kind of analysis paralysis. So yes, we draw from the wisdom of others. We draw from the wisdom of our experience. And when it comes to drawing from the wisdom of our experience, that means that we have to be open to our experience under that rubric. So it's not like, all right, I just want to do all the things so I can check them off a list. Like, I live in Switzerland. I want to climb every 4,000 foot peak in Switzerland. It's like, if you do that in a way that's just silly, right, then you'll just run yourself ragged, because you're constantly going up and down a mountain, not necessarily enjoying it or drawing forth from that experience the wisdom which it could yield, right? So it's not about having wide experiences, it is about having deep experience. And then you go through with understanding. We want to sensitize ourselves to realities rather than deadening ourselves to realities. That probably has something to do with the amount that we use our cell phone. And when it comes to reasoning, we need to practice reasoning. Just because you have a mind with which to think doesn't mean that you're necessarily thinking well. It's like when people say, I've thought a lot about it. It's like, I don't care. I care that you've thought well about it. And those are different things. And I'll be the first to admit that my thinking long doesn't mean my thinking well, et cetera, et cetera. So I think when we kind of foreground boldness, it puts before us this idea that we're perfected in action. And so we should train our prudential decision-making, as it were, on that end, because it's in pursuing that end that we as human beings are made whole.
That's super contradictory to, I think, so many people that I've talked to, where they think they need, like exactly what you were saying. They think they need to know if the girl is the one before they ask her on the first date. I was like, well, no, you actually learn it by doing it. So would you say that prudence is, you can't have perfect prudence before you act, in a sense, or like you gain prudence as you act, almost like you continue to evaluate as you move forward. And I guess, so when we think about making a decision, it means that we exclude certain things from our future path, because we're choosing one thing and we're saying no to another thing. And so in that exclusion, a lot of times we think of that as so black and white, like this has got to be permanent, or this has got to be a huge decision. But there's a lot of small decisions that lead up to most decisions. And so in that sense, it's like, well, yeah, you do have to exclude certain things, and you may not be able to make a perfectly prudent choice beforehand, but rarely do we ever make a decision that's like, you can't go back on it in some capacity if you really, really needed to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just like, I guess like a quick thought is, yeah, I mean, I think the word perfect can be said in many ways.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take an example. Let's say you're playing Go Fish with a couple of your kids. All right. And you come away at the end of the game with, 5 sets. And then your 2 kids each have 4 sets. You won. You played the game perfectly. Just because you didn't get all 13 sets doesn't mean that you're a deficient human being. And I think that the reason I set that image forward is because whenever we make decisions, we're dealing with decisions in a material world with contingent circumstances, in a constant flux of like how unanticipatable circumstances and consequences. I want to say consequences.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we think about our decisions as if we have to get all 13 sets, when that's just not the point, right?
Yeah.
The point is to do well with what you have. And I think that can be achieved in a variety of legitimate ways, which is like, getting back to discernment. I'm pretty decidedly against soulmate theory as an operative principle of dating.
Yeah.
I think that soulmate theory obtains in the mind of God. I think that God gives us some access to what he thinks about things, but I think he only kind of pulls the veil back a little bit. So I don't think that we have access to his soulmate theory, as it were. I think he just gives us enough to know in order that we can make good decisions. And I think kind of from our perspective of things, there's probably, for those who aren't married and are looking to be married, there's probably a few people whom you could marry and be happy married with. Is that like a kind of sigh of despair? Like, oh, I may as well settle. No, it's not settling, because there's no ideal spouse, right? There are good spouses. There are great spouses. There are excellent spouses, but there's no like spouse laid up in the ethereal heavens, the incarnation of whom you are waiting for at the foreordained time, until which you can lay on your couch because what you do presently contributes in no wise to that end. It's like crazy town. So I think that the vision of prudence that we want to set forward is one which is completely content with a little bit of a mess, because human life is a little bit of a mess. And here's the thing: God created it as such, not because he's creepy or vindictive, but because he thinks that this mess is beautiful as mess on the way to glory.
Yes. So much in there, so many gems to mine about discernment, because we fall into this really like black and white thinking about discernment. I find that with so many Catholics in a way that I don't see it in other areas when we're talking about virtue and so forth. But then there's like this big question about like vocation or discerning some decision. It's like good choice. I think looking at it not as like perfect choice, terrible choice, but like a spectrum of good choices, and you get to choose them, and you have to accept the consequences of each as well. It's like, that's a lot for us, because we kind of want God to like just hand us the decision, and then we can just find the one perfect decision and we don't have to suffer anymore. And that's not how it works.
No.
That's not at all. In fact, I'm going to throw another quote of yours in here because it's relevant. You said, in summary, God knows the plan. We are capable of knowing the plan, and it's up to us to know the plan and act on it. And you kind of said before that God like pulls the veil back enough for us to know, but we're not supposed to fully know it. That's basically okay. Good summary. Okay.
We just know it in the way that's proper to human beings.
Yeah.
And often we know it through our agency, right? God wills that we know the plan in enacting it, right? So God doesn't say like, all right, chalk talk. Here we go, team. Here's the plan. Now let's go out there and effectuate it. God says like, all right, let's go play. And then as we're playing, like God's kind of like over there, he's like winking. He's like, you see how this is going? Like, I do see how this is going. He's like, it's for welfare, not for woe, isn't it? I was like, I would say that it's for welfare, not for woe, but I feel at times like we're going to lose. He's like, oh yeah, I like it. I like it when you feel like that too. It kind of makes things spicy. He's like, did you like the Lord of the Rings? I was like, I did like the Lord of the Rings. He's like, do you feel like you're going to lose for about 7/8 of it? I was like, I did feel that way. He's like, make the end really cool. I was like, I did make the end really cool. He's like, let's go.
Yes, you like get decked really hard by a player on the other team, and you're like, oh, okay. So now that I've been like whacked and smacked down, now that's how I know to not leave myself open on that side, that I have to defend better this way. It's like playing the game that you get to learn it. I love it. I have this great image of you like playing football and God just like on the side, like, you got it. You're like,
you got this, Chief.
Like, is it, do I though? Do I? And he's like, nope, you got it. You're doing great.
Unclear.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. So, the last part of the title of your book is about confidence, living with confidence. And I think maybe it's because I'm married to a former wannabe Carthusian. He wanted to be a Carthusian for like 6 years. And so he's very comfortable with this like Carthusian mentality, which is that like, you don't know if your vocation was to be a Carthusian, like ever, really. And sometimes he said that they would like bury one of their brothers, and then like at the funeral, they'd be like, yeah, he was called to be a Carthusian, that one. But like until that point, until he's like cold in the ground, they're never going to be like, yeah, you're where you need to be. And so, but we're all seeking that, right? We're all seeking that sense of like, I have landed where I belong. I am where I need to be. And that kind of need for, or that desire for that feeling can lead us to analysis paralysis, which is, I think you coined that phrase, and I really, with that little ism, I really enjoy that. And so I think your discussion about just like remembering that our choices are not supposed to be, they're not, the end is not this world, is so good. Can you just give me a little summary about that, about like keeping our choices in perspective, that like we can live confidently, but it's not for here, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think, maybe one way to kind of get at this reality is to talk again about perfection. So to be perfect is premised on the nature under consideration. All right. Thanks, Father Gregory, for that philosophical jargon. Can you explain further? I was hoping you would ask. Yeah, good. So for God to be perfect it's expressed in a particular way because God just is being, right? So God subsists as perfection. So there's nothing of perfection which is foreign to God. Okay. But then like angels are perfect in an angelic way, right? So they're perfect thinking things, and they're perfected in the life of grace. So they're maximally responsive to the will of God for an angel. And we are seeking to be perfect as human beings. And there's an end to that, right? Which is heaven, which means that we as knowers and lovers will be wholly engrossed in the word of God, in the vision of the Most High God, such that we, are filled with his divine life, such that it breaks forth in praise. And that conditions the way in which we approach perfection presently. But St. Thomas will say, whereas God does not proceed to his end, and angels proceed to their end by one movement, we proceed to our end by many movements. So for us, perfection is always going to be perfection, presently, I should say, is going to be perfection on the way. And when St. Thomas, like, for instance, reads the passage that our Lord cobbles together, the double love command, to love the Lord your God with your whole mind, heart, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, he's like, whoa, did you guys see this word whole? Kind of terrible. What are your thoughts? St. Thomas says, it's a wholeness basically of willing a higher state.
Mhm.
He says we are perfect when at each moment in our lives we will, or we are open to the reception of greater graces from God. So I'm if I were to like boil that down and put it on a postcard, I'd say that we seek always to be surprised by a God who is generous. And I think that that's a perfect disposition, a continual openness. So are we going to be, perfect at the age of 9 in the same way that we're perfect at the age of 17? No, it's going to look different because it's going to be proper to each state. It's going to be proper to each step along the journey. And so for us, we need not be bogged down by trying to take snapshots of perfection, trying to get a freeze frame of what perfection looks like at this time, because I think that's to attribute too much importance to that one particular moment. And I think a lot of times we do this with respect to vocation because we think of that freeze frame when we're 23 years old or 26 years old or 31 years old or whatever as the most important moment of our lives. When truth be told, the most important moment, I can't speak tonight. I just want to the most important moment of our lives is the last one, right? What are the moments for which we ask grace of the Blessed Virgin Mary? Now and at the hour of our death. Those are the times that matter, right?
Yeah.
So only the present has grace, and the grace that we imbibe now from the generous God, whom we love and worship, right, is a grace that looks toward that last moment, that threshold of the eternal embrace towards which we strain. So I think that, like, do I need to evidence the perfection of that final time now and in the present? No. I mean, you just don't, because that's not the shape of human life, right? That's the shape of angelic life, who proceed to their end by one movement. But we're not angels. We were given a body so that it can grow and so that it can die, right? We are meant to wax and wane, but in the life of virtue, we're meant only to grow. We're meant only on an upward trajectory. Will it always look like that? No. I mean, there's going to be times where we're like, wow, seems like I am backsliding, but all with this hope, all with this openness to the fact that God can continually surprise me.
I love that. That is so hopeful, and just gives me the ability to like see things with new eyes. It's so easy to get bogged down with milestones and accomplishments and all of the things that you want along the way, which are good and holy things. Many times you want them because they're good for some reason, but they're not the ultimate. And I think you said like you want to be on the other side of that choice. You want to be closer to that heaven. So it's not even about like what I do. It's not about what I do so much as like who I become and who I'm always continually becoming. So I want to finish up with this lovely quote of yours. Only you are able to reveal what God's grace can do in the here and now of your life. By offering your consent to life as God gives it, you become a monstrance of his peculiar love and announce something unique of his divine life. So any final words that you want to share with anyone kind of struggling to make any decisions? Again, broad sweeping advice, but anything you see that you just are like, I wish people knew this.
I would say, what you mentioned at the beginning of the thing, God's not standing by waiting for us to fail, right? God is present, God is prompting, God is inviting, God is goading, God is inspiring, such that the fruits of our choice lead us ultimately back to him. It'll take time, step by step, slowly, but provided only that we are open to the grace, that we are open to the recognition that there are obstacles to that grace, which God will address, through and in us over the course of the length of our life. God will have his way, and his way is good. So you have what it takes to live your life well. Trust in that.
Yes. I saw this incredible meme that was like, when God created the plan that he had in mind for you, he accounted for your stupidity as well.
This is true.
Thank you. I needed that, because sometimes I'm like, oh no, I've messed it up. Like I'm never getting back on track. And it's like, no. God knew. He knew that you were going to do everything stupid that you were going to do.
Yep.
Oh,
God makes all things work to the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Amen. Even sin, even stupidity.
Yes. Like St. Paul was even talking about, like, I rejoice in my weaknesses. Like I rejoice in those. And it's like, whoa, that's a whole new way to look at it. Right. Oh my gosh, world turned upside down because we regret them a lot. But then it's like, well, actually that's an opportunity for God to manifest his mercy and his glory even more. Yeah. Which is, whew, yeah. So good. Thank you so much, Father Gregory. What a pleasure to have you back on the podcast and YouTube show. I'm just so happy to have you. And I will definitely be including a link for your beautiful book so that everyone can rush out and get it virtually. Nobody rushes anywhere to get anything. Nobody stands in line for things anymore. It's just all virtual, but it's fine. You can order it. You can break your fingers typing in your credit card information. Yes. So, well, God bless you. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Cheers.
It's a pleasure.